So about 5 years ago, IBM opened up the first commercial research lab on the African continent with the goal of using data and analytics to address some of Africa's grand challenges.
This is Dr. Skyler Speakman. He's the technical lead for machine learning and artificial intelligence at IBM Research Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya, and he's currently visiting the IC school at EPFL.
So we have 4 verticals. These are domains where we're trying to build expertise in the area, and those include financial services, healthcare, public services, and water.
Let's detail the first of these verticals.
So for example, on financial services, we really are big on financial inclusion. So getting more people plugged into financial services that the developed world may take for granted. For example, the ability to make easy payments, to save money, to borrow money, insurance, or investments. These are services that simply do not exist in mass or cheaply in the developing markets. And so we try to use our relationships with banks and telcos in order to increase access to these services.
But how useful is this to local people?
On the inclusive financial services side, about 2 billion people do not have access to savings or credit. About 200 million small and medium enterprises do not have access to these financial services. So there is both a financial motivation as seeing these guys as future customers for going out and doing the inclusion, but it's also part of the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations to increase the capacity of local financial institutions to offer these services. So it is a huge potential market, which is one reason why IBM was the first major tech company on the ground in Africa. But there's also the notion of having impact and actually seeing your work have a difference in people's lives.
So how can machine learning help, and what is needed to do useful machine learning?
I would say a lot of it is access to data. So Africa is obviously not a data-rich environment, and so we have to get creative with the data sources that we use. Some great examples, ones that we've worked on tangentially, are satellite data. So that's something that's available around the world, including Africa. Ones that we have a bit more experience with are telco data, so cell phones. Those are amazing devices for generating and capturing data. And so one of the examples that we use is to use cell phone data as a means of creating a credit score for an individual.
Credit scores allow to better target customers, but how are they computed?
It's a good old-fashioned binary classification algorithm. So we have labeled examples of people who have paid and those who haven't paid. And we have features such as airtime top-up amounts, mobile money volumes, how long they've been with the telco, and we can use that information to create a model that says this is the probability someone will pay back. So it really is a very traditional, almost Kaggle-like problem that has now been implemented, and we have a system up and running in East Africa that's scored over 1 million people so far. So it's really cool to have something as simple as binary classification, build a model, be confident enough in it to roll it out and to see it impact people's lives.
And this project is doing very well.
This is something, actually, it's one of the success stories of our lab because it's something that we've turned into a product that we've handed off to the business unit. So IBM's got these 2 different arms. One is the research and one is the business unit. So the research are the ones that try to think forward, what's going to be a new product, 5 years from now, and we try to build it out, show it that it works. And then we are very much involved in the process of handing that over to the business unit, which then has got a megaphone to say, we can really sell this all over the world. So we do have a new product right now that is re-implementing this idea in yet another country. And that's done on the business side of things. So that's a really good example of the research coming up with an idea, solving the problem, doing the first implementation, and then handing it off to the business unit.
Let's talk about another project of IBM Research Africa.
So another project that we're working on at the lab, this came out of an internship project, actually. There is a malaria simulator that takes in dozens of parameters and tries to predict the spread of malaria. And 2 of those parameters are how much you should be using bed nets, so how you should distribute bed nets to the community, and how much you should be doing spraying for mosquitoes. And these simulations take a long time to compute and a long time to run with dozens of parameters. So we are not malaria experts, but we did actually come up with a simple agent simulator that allowed to explore that parameter space more intelligently. And it found a better minimum in terms of the DALYs.
DAILY stands for Disability Adjusted Life Year. It's basically a well-known metric to measure the negative impact of a disease depending not only on death, but also on disabilities caused by the disease.
And so we were able to have this agent process the simulations on an order of magnitude larger number of parameters than a human would be able to do. And we came up with a lower bound on the dailies. So that was an example of just an internship project that now we want to build into a larger scale implementation, because this has implications for large NGOs who put funding out into the malaria space, but then they have a hard time cataloging all the results that come back. And so we would like to have a platform that allows researchers to put their models up on the system, and then for other researchers to validate those models and run their own simulations on it as well. So what we had was just one start about that, but we're really excited about expanding that to areas well outside malaria. But malaria was a great use case of saying there's some cool models out there that we don't necessarily understand, but we are able to create an agent that does these simulations in an intelligent way and finds a better minimum.
Now, these were only 2 high-impact projects out of many, and there are many more things to be done.
For a small group within the IBM Research Lab Africa, there are 2 different labs. One is in Nairobi, and then one is in Johannesburg, South Africa. And we've had to narrow down our focus into these 4 pillars: financial services, healthcare, water, and public services. But there are dozens, hundreds of problems. Africa, if as rich as anything, it does have a lot of problems. And we need to be creative in the way we go about these things in a different way than just importing solutions from more developed nations. There's plenty of examples where smart, well-meaning people have used a system that worked well in developed nations and then has not worked out in the developing world. So that's something we really have to be cognizant of. And living there and being, boots on the ground in Nairobi and in that market really makes you realize the importance of having that context.
Yes, because working in Africa raises many non-technical challenges.
Yes, of course. I would say the non-technical ones may outnumber the technical ones, but that's something that, like I said earlier, of being there in the space, even knowing the stakeholders personally, because you're there living among them, makes you much more capable of understanding the problems.
So there's much to be done, and more manpower is needed.
Yeah, we're looking to hire smart people. So a part of the AI horizontal, we need to be able to create research, consume research, and communicate research. So those are kind of the 3 ways I would break down what we're looking for individuals who want to come and work for IBM Research Africa. On the consume side of things, we have 4 exciting domains. And when they have a data science or machine learning question, we need to be able to say, this is the direction you should go. That does not mean you need to reinvent the wheel. You need to know the fields and be able to say, I think this is the solution you want to go with. The clients that come to us, they don't care about your particular research paper. They want to know how well we can solve the problem. And so that's why it's important for you to be able to consume large amounts of research. At the same time, we also need to be willing to push this field forward itself, and so that's on the create. We do need to make our own little niche, and that can be independent of the problems of Africa. That's something that is intrinsic for all the research scientists that want to say, no, this is something I contributed to this space. So we do have that outside of the 4 verticals. And then finally, there's the communicate side of things. This is building up capacity and recruiting. We need people to come in and join us. In Africa, we have some exciting problems. We have a very vibrant work environment, and some of that is on the recruiting side, but also in the capacity building. A lot of young software developers in the lab that we need to build up their skills and encourage them to apply for their own master's or PhD programs.
I think the spending power, the developing middle class, the fact that we are now starting to focus on infrastructures, and the fact that natural resources seem to have come to the fore makes Africa actually very, very interesting for people to invest in.
We're also trying to provide somewhat of a roadmap and best practices drawn from the literature on how can we use machine learning to advance development goals.